Late one night, two officers stopped a black woman, profiling her for no reason, until they realized she was their new police chief. What began as a routine stop turned into a public reckoning, exposing deep-seated racism and sparking a confrontation that would shock everyone. But let's start at the beginning. The streets of downtown bustled with the remnants of the day's activity, though the evening was settling in. The glow of neon signs from local diners and bars painted the sidewalks with vibrant streaks of color, while the occasional honk from a passing car added to the urban symphony. The faint aroma of roasted coffee beans wafted from a nearby cafe that was preparing to close for the night. Among the scattered foot traffic, Alexa Johnson walked briskly along the sidewalk, her heavy bag swaying slightly with her steps. Alexa, a striking black woman of 38, was wrapped in a plain but well-fitted black coat that fell just below her knees. Her sturdy leather boots thudded softly against the concrete, the sound barely audible over the ambient noise. Her short, natural curls framed a face that carried equal parts exhaustion and resolve. Her posture, though burdened by the weight of the bags, radiated an unshakable confidence. As Alexa passed under a flickering street lamp, a patrol car slowed to a halt nearby. The sudden flash of red and blue lights broke the rhythm of the evening, casting a pulsing glow onto the nearby buildings. The hum of the car's engine seemed to grow louder as the officers exited the vehicle. Officer Davis, a tall man with a rigid stance and a demeanor that exuded authority, stepped forward. His uniform was crisp, his face set in a frown. His partner, Officer Harris, followed, his movements deliberate, one hand resting lightly on his belt, dangerously close to his holster. Alexa paused mid-step, placing her bags down gently on the sidewalk. Her expression was calm, her sharp eyes taking in the situation with a quiet intensity. "Is there a problem, officers?" she asked, her tone measured and polite but tinged with subtle defiance. Davis, already agitated by her composure, stepped closer. His towering figure cast a long shadow over her. "Mind telling us what you're doing out here this late?" he demanded, his voice sharp and accusatory. Alexa's brow arched slightly, the faintest hint of amusement flashing in her eyes. "I'm just heading home from work," she replied evenly, her voice carrying a firmness that refused to yield. "Do I need to explain my every step?" Officer Harris, sensing the escalating tension, cut in. His hand shifted slightly on his belt, a small but deliberate gesture. "We've had reports of loitering and theft in this area. Do you have any ID?" Alexa sighed, a mixture of exasperation and weariness flashing across her face. Slowly, she reached into her bag and pulled out her wallet, her movements deliberate to avoid any unnecessary suspicion. "I have nothing to hide," she said, holding out her identification card. Davis snatched it from her hand and glanced at it, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Alexa Johnson? Never heard of you," he muttered dismissively, his arrogance palpable. He turned to his partner. "Let's run this, just to be sure." Harris nodded and headed back to the patrol car, his boots crunching softly on the gravel along the curb. Davis remained, his piercing gaze fixed on Alexa as if daring her to react. The seconds stretched into minutes, and the tension in the air thickened. Passers-by began to take notice. A young woman slowed her pace, her phone discreetly angled toward the scene, its camera light blinking faintly. A man in a hoodie paused across the street, leaning against a lamppost, his arms crossed as he watched intently. The quiet murmur of the city grew louder as curious bystanders whispered among themselves, their faces marked with concern and skepticism. Alexa stood tall, her arms loosely crossed over her chest, her gaze steady and unwavering. The streetlights cast a soft glow over her features, highlighting the calm resolve etched into her expression. Despite the mounting hostility from Officer Davis, she refused to flinch, her dignity intact. Davis, now visibly irritated by her composure, adjusted his stance, his smirk faltering. The growing audience and the unspoken challenge in Alexa's silence gnawed at his confidence. The faint crackle of the police radio echoed from the patrol car, signaling the next act in this tense, unfolding drama. The tension in the air felt suffocating as Officer Harris emerged from the patrol car, his movements slow and deliberate. His usually steady demeanor was gone, replaced by a pallor that spread across his face like a shadow. Clutching Alexa's ID in one hand, he hurried toward Davis, his body stiff with unease. He leaned in close, his voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the street. She's the new police chief," Harris whispered, each word tinged with disbelief. Davis froze, his earlier bravado draining away. His smirk faltered, then vanished entirely as the words registered. "Wait, are you serious?" he stammered, his eyes darting toward Alexa. For a moment, he looked like a man caught in quicksand, his arrogance crumbling under the weight of the revelation. Harris gave a single, hesitant nod. "Yeah, I ran her ID through the system. It's her." Alexa stood a few feet away, her posture calm yet commanding, her arms now crossed over her chest. The faintest smirk tugged at her lips as she watched the officer's growing panic. Her sharp eyes narrowed slightly as she tilted her head, feigning curiosity. "Well?" she asked, her voice cool but cutting. "Is there a problem with my ID?" The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint rustling of wind through nearby trees and the distant murmur of the gathering crowd. Davis opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His confidence was shattered, his arrogance replaced by a mixture of embarrassment and fear. No, ma'am," he finally managed, his voice unsteady. Just a misunderstanding." Alexa arched a brow, her expression unimpressed. She stepped closer, her boots clicking against the pavement with deliberate precision. The subtle movement forced Davis to take a step back, his discomfort palpable. "A misunderstanding, huh?" she repeated, her tone laced with icy authority. "Tell me, Officers Davis and Harris, how often do you stop people like me for suspicious behavior? Or was it just my skin color that caught your attention?" Her words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Davis's face reddened, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled for a response. Harris avoided her gaze, his shoulders slumping under the weight of her scrutiny. The crowd, now a dozen strong, murmured in agreement, their phones raised to capture every moment of the unfolding scene. Alexa's voice softened, but the intensity in her eyes didn't waver. "I suggest you think carefully about your answer," she said, her words deliberate and precise. "Because tomorrow morning, we'll be having a conversation about what protect and serve really means." The officers exchanged a quick, panicked glance, neither daring to speak. The balance of power had shifted entirely, and Alexa, calm and unflinching, stood as its center. The streetlights illuminated her sharp features, casting long shadows on the pavement as the realization of their mistake sank deeper into the officers' minds. This was not a misunderstanding they could talk their way out of. It was a reckoning. The murmurs of the growing crowd swelled into a low hum, their collective attention fixed on the tense confrontation. Phones captured every moment, their cameras glinting under the streetlights. Faces reflected a mix of curiosity, anger, and vindication as bystanders whispered among themselves. The atmosphere was electric, each second brimming with anticipation. Davis, his usual confidence shattered, attempted to salvage the situation. "Ma'am, we didn't mean any offense," he stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of the moment. His hands fidgeted nervously at his sides. "We were just doing our job." Alexa stopped mid-step and turned back, her sharp gaze locking onto him like a laser. The smirk she'd worn moments earlier was gone, replaced by an expression of cool fury. "Your job?" she snapped, her voice ringing out with the authority of someone who commanded respect. "Your job is to serve and protect, not to profile and harass." The crowd stirred, their murmurs growing louder. A young man in a hoodie muttered, "Finally, someone saying it," loud enough to draw nods of agreement from those around him. Alexa stepped closer to the officers, her presence towering despite her average stature. "Tomorrow morning, I'll see you both in my office," she continued, her tone like steel. "We're going to have a very detailed conversation about proper policing and racial bias. Dismissed." The word hit like a hammer. Davis and Harris nodded, their faces red with humiliation. Neither dared to meet her eyes as they muttered quick apologies before retreating to their patrol car. Davis fumbled with the door handle, his hands visibly shaking, while Harris avoided the piercing stares of the crowd. As Alexa turned to leave, her posture tall and unwavering, the tension in the air released like a snapped cord. The crowd erupted into applause, the sound echoing through the street. Cheers and claps filled the space, mingling with shouts of encouragement. "About time someone held them accountable," a woman yelled from the back, her voice cutting through the noise. Others echoed her sentiment, their faces alight with a shared sense of triumph. Alexa paused for a moment, her back to the crowd. Though she didn't turn around, the faintest hint of a smile crossed her lips before she resumed walking. The glow of the streetlights illuminated her figure as she disappeared down the sidewalk, leaving behind a scene that no one would soon forget. A moment of justice that resonated far beyond the confines of that downtown street. The next day, Alexa held a meeting with the entire department. Her message was clear. "We're here to rebuild trust with the community, not destroy it with outdated biases and unchecked power. If you're not ready to be part of that change, there's the door." News of the incident spread quickly, with media outlets picking up the story. The community hailed Alexa as a much-needed force for justice, while Davis and Harris faced internal reviews and mandatory training on racial sensitivity. Alexa's first week as chief wasn't how she planned it, but she wouldn't have it any other way. Change, she knew, often starts with uncomfortable truths, and she was ready to lead that change.